bad moment right now. We have several examples of in Latin America and in other region in the country in Guatemala. It is a severe because Guatemala, unlike other countries of the region, there is not a center, there is not a university that is recognized that have a shift to establish the capacity to take this. Therefore, they are obliged to have studies that are improvised, that are caused by companies that at the long term do not exist, and other that they have, but they don't have the. I will say that the dynamic that we see right now is everything that that happens, and they do not know what is happening, and they do not shift to know what is happening, dynamic of the political dynamics of the country, and it's very complex. But its conditions, the democratic conditions, and the culture and all. And they are looking for exploring, for seeing everything that's happening and what is trying to explain, but it's very deep. For instance, they should not they do not stop. They do not get to know that the movement of seeds has achieved a lot of things, and it was considered as a party, as a party of the capital, and now the seed party has achieved a lot of things in the last few years, despite of being a new party, and has achieved create bases precisely for through the question of the system, through the need to have new people, a lot of young people of university that are looking forward to analyze interests in politics, to other kinds of mechanisms and not the traditional mechanisms. And this somehow it help us to respond why the seed party is going to the second round, and why as they did not see it coming. And it happens that a lot of votes are paid by the same candidates, by the same parties. They are just right in the measure, and they contributed to that fact. Besides this, Renzo, let us also identify these different scenarios. They're going to be a ballot. UNE and the Semilla are going to be faced in August, and it's in the midst of inequality in this nation. And there is also marked by corruption, the trafficking, migration, but migration subject has not been addressed in the electoral campaigns. The question is why, and what is going to happen so that this vote will be decisive, so that it passes the 50% that did not achieve in this first round. And besides, we are talking about alliances. What do you think? Well, regarding the first thing that you talk about the corruption, I believe that they have talked, but not with enough strength. I believe that the seed movement has been the only one who have talked about this with serious. First, because most of the parties are representative of corruption, and second, because the corruption subject is very united to the proposal of the parties, and try to look to like corruption. Stop this corruption is basically something very hard to do, and this goes against the main groups of anti-power in this country. And this is a very important subject that we must talk regarding the second question, is that the vast majority that did not voted, and they can find in the seed movement this. In fact, the seed movement has talked about, in some declaration, has talked about the idea of trying to have a work group with the people that are in the exile, those who were leading the cases of corruption of the MTV, and backing all of that. This indicates that they want to give strength to the corruption, and they can resume this, and this can become an important issue to address as main elements to capitalize to have the necessary to a second round. That will be in any case a measure because the UNE has organization, has experience, and the party, the SID movement is new, and Sandra Torres represents very clear what today the citizen is saying that do not want. And the SID represents the traditional, it represents the traditional politics, traditional people that have been doing nothing practically. Therefore, I believe that adding to the other elements of anti-vote and adding to the vote that UNE did not win with a marked difference regarding the second and the result of the UNE has come to the second round, and it's the same results that it had in 2015 and 2019, and therefore the second round will be very competitive, and it will have the ability, so the SID party will win. And this will not be easy, but I believe there is certain conditions for that. I would like to know your opinion regarding this point, Mari, because in the middle of the alliance there is also the destiny of a whole nation with a marked agenda as well as UNE of the SID party. Will this we wait in the electorate at when deciding the vote? And in second place, I would like to know what will be the real challenge that the next president of this country should face in the midst of a social economic agenda that is going to be delayed not only by the effects of the pandemic but by the institutional manage, the judicial manage, and with the debts that they have regarding in the corruption in that country. Well, I would like to talk about two issues regarding the first question. One of them has to do with the orientation that is going to have the electorate in the second runoff. And a sector that voted null, and somehow it could reduce several sectors of voters of certain parties of the rights, and they are going to be there. They are going to be there with the votes, and they could have the proposal of a candidate, of a new figure, of a new person in the electoral campaign. And in second place, it's important to say that Sandra Torres is the representative of a block of power that is very popular in the country, and to say the group of corruption, and that involves that is going to be the representative of a group of parties that, if we think about the results that they have had to the Congress of the Republic, are the parties that will have the control of the legislative part. And it's very probably that these alliances are going to go with Sandra Torres because it guarantees impunity, it guarantees negotiations, it guarantees the continuity of management of legal and illegal of the public resources of the public, and besides, of course, that it represents, Sandra Torres represents the option for the continuity of dynamics of accumulation, capital accumulation that been resisted by people and movements and social movements in the country. Regarding the second question, is with a question that is the electoral process. We see the lack of addressing the structural problems beyond talking the problems of education, of health that are very important. There are a series of problems linked to the capital accumulation. Among other things, this involves that 70% of the population are not. They do not have the possibility of finding a job with a have a job with a salary, with a contract, and that they survive in the activities of informal economy. A lot of these economies are obliged to emigrate to the United States. The problematic of the farmers, of the workers, of women, of indigenous people are part of the problems that should be assumed by the government. Have malnutrition problems, the violence going to continue, the criminality that are part of the things that are affecting a country, and that today there is no alternative. Maybe it is more, the closest thing to do is the proposal of Arevalo. Therefore, that is very questionable when they have these statistics and where they say that Guatemala had the unemployment has been reduced, but the employment that they have is very bad, and they have increased the rates of extreme poverty, and this marked this inequality that is present in the country, and the monopolies that keep the country alive. And there's a statistic where they say that Guatemala is one of the countries that more circulation of helicopters as transportation has. In the skies, we see the helicopters, and there are a lot of people that do not have it, and they are working and they don't have anything to eat. These are challenges that are going to mark the social agenda for the president of the second round. I would like to thank both of you for joining with this first part of interviewing to know the challenges that have had the electorate in the midst of the high percentage, 17.4 of null votes that have overpassed what UNE and CIPARI achieved. Thank you both for your time. Let us mark the second pause in a critical move. We share a strategic move with you along with the invitation. Guatemala goes to the polls on August 20. The big surprise of the contest, what is Semilla Party? What chance does the country have of escaping high rates of migration, poverty, inequality, and the trafficking, and how will this affect foreign interests? Let us share some of your thoughts. Pablo Javier Arenas, participate with us. Thank you, Pablo. I wish Arevalo comes to presidency, but the outlook for Guatemala as any country would be the integration, says. Eduardo Larco Solano says, in Latin America, we have a lot of surprises at which this movement achieved maintaining the unity and organization needed to counter-arrest the action of the right forces that are very vital to divide and to unite to stop. When we'll be back, we'll be talking about this. Stay tuned. Let's see how Guatemala fits into the global geopolitical chessboard. Guatemala has an important strategic position situated in the heart of Central America. It forms a trade route of particular interest to the United States, which has increased its involvement in the region since the last century as part of the Monroe Doctrine. In 1954, the CIA collaborated the overthrow of the President Jacob Arbenz after the order the nationalization of the lands of the United Fruit Company as part of the agrarian reforms. Since then, the U.S. has been pushing the Central American countries' politics. Most recently, in 2019, the Donald Trump administration forced Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras to sign an agreement of migration to stop what it considered an invasion. The agreement empowered the White House to send asylum seekers from third countries to Guatemala while the cases were being processed. After the Constitutional Court forced the pact through Congress in July that year, the then President Jimmy Morales canceled the meeting with Trump, who threatened to impose tariffs on Guatemalan exports and family remittances in the nation if the nation did not sign. After these warnings, the then Guatemala Interior Minister Enrique Denhart signed the agreement in the presence of the U.S. President. Several NGOs announced the degrading treatment of the migrants in the custody of the Customs and Border Protection. They also warned that these conditions could lead applicants to abandon the regularization process. Later, the Secretary General of the Luis Almagro supported an inclusive dialogue between all sectors of national life while encouraging the position of institutional strengthening of the country. He thus distanced himself from the social crisis in Guatemala after President Alejandro Yamatei evoked the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The government of Yamatei and his predecessor Jimmy Morales were open defenders of Jerusalem as the alleged capital of Israel. This position, they supported the policy of apartheid that the United States has imposed on the Palestinian people. The relations between these two states are closer than one may think. Israeli agent Ari Ben Menashe revealed in his book that the United States, under the order of President Riga, ordered the illegal delivery of 6 helicopters to the Army of Guatemala. The above was proven in November 2016 in the trial of General Manuel Benedicto Lucas Garcia, former chief of staff of the group forces of the Central American country accused of genocide. In 2019, Guatemala and Israel have shown interest in promoting a free trade agreement. The country was also part of the self-proclaimed Lima group of countries hostile to Venezuela. Let's review how the press have talked about the process of elections in Guatemala. We shared with you. The website has said that the leftist candidate of the movement SEED is surprised to the campaigns in Guatemala. The website says that this candidate, Bernardo Arevalo of movement SEED, gave a big surprise the presidential election and is going to the ballots against Sandra Torres in August 20. Arevalo, that was waiting for the confirmation of the data, has pointed out that his team is aware that the counting has not finished. It is not the time to win victory. We are wise, we are measured, and he said that in a press conference, and they were waiting for their solid results in the in the Supreme Court. Torres is 67 years old, and in these polls will be the political forces and the alliances of the country to the ballot in that country. Another website that we share with you is the Economist. Said that presidential election in Guatemala, uncertainty for the substance and votes buying. It's part of the irregularities that have been announced throughout this electoral process that was in that country on Sunday. Guatemala voted on Sunday to elect a president in the midst of the complaints, buying votes, and concerns about the lack of political options, and there is a lot of corruption of poverty in the country. Let us we continue the analysis from Guatemala. Join us, Canton Lee, international analyst, professor in economic science. Thank you for your time. I would like to know your thoughts. There have been a lot of talk about the process, about the democratic facade that the country is going through in the midst of all these areas as corruption, unemployment, poverty, drug trafficking, migration. However, there is also the interests, not only locally but internationally. That's what I would like to talk, because Guatemala is one of the fewer countries that does not have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Why not to approach to China? That will have a lot of benefits, as a lot of countries have done with the establishment of bilateral relations. Welcome. Good afternoon to everyone, to all the people of TeleSUR that is watching right now. Would you repeat the question? I did not listen it, of course. I would like to know your thoughts. I would like to know your thoughts in the economic area. What would be in the best interest of Guatemala to have relations with China, as a lot of countries had? Is the case of the paradigm that Honduras has made. and what keep holding to politics with Taiwan and aligned to the United States. I mean, the country has not achieved to overcome poverty, unemployment, and other important issues that affect it. What do you think? I believe that we should talk about in the framework that we are in right now, the elections in Guatemala, in which we have a second round between the parties of UNE and SID movement with Sandra Torre that have 15.8 more than 68,000 votes, and the SID party with percent more than I believe that both parties, one from the left, is for the progressive side, and Democrats. Carton, sorry interrupt, because this is such a percentage, and the candidates that are going to the ballots, we have been seeing it in the first part of the program. I will not like to repeat these participations because the viewers are not going to be interested in this. We have seen the participation of Torres and UNE and arrival of SID. What it is my interest. What will happen in Guatemala regarding the international relations? I don't know. It seems that we have lost touch with our guests. Let us review your thoughts regarding what we share in our program today. Thank you for participating with your thoughts, impressions. The question is, Guatemala is going to ballot on August 20 to be surprised the campaign of SID party. What is the opportunity of the country to get out of the rates of migration, poverty, inequality, drug trafficking, and what are the interests of the internationally? Pablo Javier Arena says, I wish Revla comes to presidency, but the outlook of Guatemala, as of any country, is integration. We've reached the end of the broadcast. I'm Paola Perez, and I invite you, our audience, to tune in tomorrow so we can have more critical moves.
We share your feelings, exalt your accomplishments, and show your reality. Our approach is global and keeps us in tune with the peoples. Caribbean countries also get our signal. With enthusiasm, we will continue to broadcast for them. Because we are TeleSUR, the news broadcaster from South America and the Caribbean.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
为了保持身体健康，我冥想。
Para mantenerme saludable, yo corro.
To keep myself healthy, I study.
Για να διατηρηθώ υγιής, τρέφομαι σωστά.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo bailo.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo purifico mi espíritu a través del cuerpo. ¿Y tú?
Get your body. Tuesdays, only on TeleSUR.
In It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
El mundo se mueve constantemente y todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos. Se mueve la geopolítica mundial. Nos preguntamos qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento, cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan. Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. TeleSUR documentaries. Sundays. Only on TeleSUR.
The story goes, you're gonna make it if you try, and if you don't, may your life waste away, 'cause it's your fault. Like the sheen of a rotting fish, the glitter just dazzles. For everyone who's filthy rich, a million must suffer. So start your climb up the money tree. The best slaves are those who think they're free. Oh, say, can you see Rome is burning? Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. As life unfolds, people struggle to make ends meet. Look around, what you see, the hunger, the homeless, the powerless streets. On your mind, the need for change. Channel your pain and your rage. Stand up and link your arms for strength. Shout it out to the police starts with the state to divide and rule the working class to keep us broken, not building anew. Lessons of history revealed, organize or be displaced. The rulers have no solutions, only violence, wars and jails. Stick together and fight for your just claims. Workers united will prevail. Oh, say can't you see Rome is over? Oh, build a new, 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 oh, build a new.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
为了保持身体健康，我冥想。
Para mantenerme saludable, yo corro.
To keep myself healthy, I study.
Για να διατηρηθώ υγιής, τρέφομαι σωστά.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo bailo.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo purifico mi espíritu a través del cuerpo. ¿Y tú?
Guide your body. Tuesdays. Only on TeleSUR.
It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
El mundo se mueve constantemente y todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos. Se mueve la geopolítica mundial. Nos preguntamos qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento, cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan. Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. TeleSUR documentaries. Sundays. Only on TeleSUR.
Un canto por la América Unida. Mira, que lo escuchan allá arriba. ¡Vamos! Somos la tierra, somos la arcilla, la esperanza que brota y germina. 500 años nos han pisoteado, aquí seguimos, de aquí no nos vamos. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta, unido que no calla. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta, unido que no calla. Pueblo latino, vamos pa'lante, tumbando fronteras, somos gigantes, nadie se rinde, vamos para arriba, esa tierra es tuya y también es mía. Pueblo mestizo, guerrero y solidario, aquí nadie es extraño, aquí somos hermanos. Todos los países digan, presente. Venezuela y Cuba, presente. Nicaragua, Honduras, presente. El Caribe entero. América, América, continente se levanta, un pueblo unido que no calla, no se detiene. América, 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 continente se levanta, un pueblo unido que no calla.
Soy Chupacatari, soy hueca impuro, 5 siglos resistiendo el atropello y el abuso. El avia ya la reflorece junto al alba, sigue un solo continente porque rayos nos separa. Con Sucre y Bolívar seguimos pa'lante, pa' encima latino, no hay visa que nos pare.
Desde la Patagonia hasta el Río Bravo, los latinos levantamos la mano. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta, unido que no calla. América, América, lindísimo continente se levanta, unido que no calla. México y Bolivia, presente. Puerto Rico libre, presente. Todo el continente, presente. Latino.
We share your feelings, exalt your accomplishments, ensure your reality. Our approach is global and keeps us in tune with the peoples. Caribbean countries also get our signal. With enthusiasm, we will continue to broadcast for them. Because we are TeleSUR, the news broadcaster from South America and the Caribbean.
为了保持身体健康，我冥想。
Para mantenerme saludable, yo corro.
To keep myself healthy, I study.
Για να διατηρηθώ υγιής, τρέφομαι σωστά.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo bailo.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo purifico mi espíritu a través del cuerpo. ¿Y tú?
Get Your Body. Tuesdays, only on TeleSUR.
Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
Yet another shooting massacre of 17 students in Parkland, Florida has brought the issue of corporate lobbying back into public consciousness, with outrage over the National Rifle Association's power and influence over politicians. According to Open Secrets, in 2017, the total amount spent on lobbying Congress was $3 billion, with 11,444 registered lobbyists on the Hill. That's 26 lobbyists for every elected representative. The top spender was Big Pharma at nearly $300 million, followed by industries such as oil and gas, telecommunications, weapons and war, and big banks. Experts suggest that the real amount spent on lobbying is really 3 times higher than being disclosed, and the true amount of lobbyists closer to 100,000. The reforms that most Americans believe help combat the system of pay-to-play politics have instead been weaponized against them. Congressional researcher James D'Angelo has a theory based on years of mining through data that the Legislative Reorganization Act of 1970, which opened up politicians' voting records, has only helped special interests and corporations, not the people. I sat down with James to talk about how corporate lobbyists exploit transparency laws, which are thought to make the US system more democratic. So before we get into how transparency has been weaponized, let's talk about how things used to be before 1970. Let's talk about how the president voted, how Congress functioned.
Right, so it's actually a very interesting time. I mean, most people look back at the early 70s as a time of turmoil. There's Vietnam, there's lots of civil rights questions, but mathematically there's some very interesting things. We are talking the least partisan Congress in American history. We're talking the lowest levels of income inequality in American history. So the rich and the poor are closer than at any time in US history and some of the lowest in world history. Campaign finance is 0 or next to 0. Certainly if we're talking Congress, presidents always had some campaign finance issues going back to the Roosevelts, etc. But for a member of Congress, they're not receiving money to run for Congress in 1970. Throughout history, there have been about 200 floor votes a year. So if you saw the Lincoln movie, that's actually, the entire movie is about a floor vote, which is the final vote. And that vote has always been public. All the committees, however, and all the discussions and in the hearings, all of those votes, so John F. Kennedy, when he was a senator, all those votes were secret. We don't have any record of Kennedy voting in committee. And those votes are upwards of thousands per year. And that's when all the most sensitive work gets done. So there's very few political scholars that would reject the idea that committees are where the work gets done. That's where everything gets done. And then the floor vote is considered, as said by many, the show vote. So you basically already know how you're going to vote. So if you're talking about eliminating special interests, if you're talking about taking on a corporation or et cetera, you're going to do that in committee, where the votes have always been secret, dating straight back to the Constitution, the writing of the Constitution, and even before.
And in 1970, there was something called the Legislative Reorganization Act that fundamentally changed the way Congress functioned and our entire government. Talk about what that was and what it did.
Right, so it's important to realize there's only two legislative reorganization acts in history. There's one in 1946, which scholars have written endlessly on, and then there's one in 1970. And think about the name of that. Legislative means law or lawmaking. Reorganization is we're going to change it. Act means it's no longer a bill, it was passed into law. So we are going to change how Congress works. Now, notably, again, this is a very important time to change Congress because we're talking about a time when inequality's been dropping for years, incarceration rates have been dropping, and there's no campaign finance spending. And then we change it, and we have this explosion of changes with how Congress is responding to corporate power, et cetera. The law states a number of things, the most important of which is it says all committees must publish their votes. If you're a lobbyist in 1969, we know exactly where you are. You're in the lobby. Your name fits who you are. If you're a lobbyist after this act, especially by 73 and 75 when they underline this act, you're sitting in the committee. Now they've opened up these tables and you've got all the lobbyists and all the journalists here, and you're lucky if you've got a couple constituents in these rooms. So if you're talking about Armed Service Committee, Ways and Means Committees, these are all $1,000 per hour lobbyists sitting there as they're now facing them.
It seems like such an honorable initiative. Let's open up Congress. Let's make all the votes public. Let's finally hold these people accountable. Obviously, we know where it went, but what entities were even pushing for this to happen? And was it did it have good intentions initially? Right, so it's always hard to know what's in the hearts of men and who was pushing for it behind the scenes. And the thing, these acts passed overwhelmingly, so 192 to 6. But we do know certain organizations pushed heavily for this. One is the AFL-CIO was involved. They were excited. They were a very liberal group, and most of the groups that were outwardly pushing for transparency were very liberal, pushing for more civil rights laws or more union protections, et cetera. And they wanted to make sure that the legislation they were pushing for was passing. The main person pushing for this is a guy named Richard Conlin. Richard Conlin was also a lobbyist. But he knew almost all the congressmen. He was called the 436th member of Congress by a lot of people. And so we would meet him in the elevators, and he would talk to them all about the provisions he was trying to pass, and they would say, oh, we're definitely supporting you, we're definitely supporting you. They'd walk into the committee, then the bill would fail. Mm-hmm. And he'd go, but I counted, 60% of my, the votes were going to come my way. But the votes were flipping on him inside of committee, and so he was very furious about this. And that's exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to pressure from the outside, as a lobbyist, the way members vote. So these are the two main groups. We don't have civic groups running around with banners, we want more transparency. And certainly at the time, if you look up in what Google, whatever it is that measures word usage, transparency is barely even used, accountability is barely even used. Those things have risen in the 70s and 80s, and some people have suggested they've been initiatives pushed by corporations that were kicked outside of committees. And so these groups that weren't making it in committees were some of the initial transparency proponents. so many horrifying trends have taken place since 1970, James, that you outline. I mean, just go over some of them.
Taxes on the wealthy, up until 1976, the marginal tax rate, so there's effective tax rates, so not statutory tax rates, but what the rich are actually paying, are around 74%. So the wealthy are paying 74%, and it's been high for many years. It certainly went up with World War II. As soon as they open the Ways and Means Conference committees and the finance committees, which are the committees where the Senate and the House resolve their differences, they open those at the end of 75. As soon as they open in 76, the taxes on the wealthy plummet. Boom. In 3 years, it goes down 50%, and it's been flat ever since. And so this is what we see, right? As soon as particular committees get open, the legislation immediately benefits whatever special interests. As we know, the US government was actually on the forefront of environmental legislation. So in the 60s and right up into 71, we were passing very strong environmental bills.
People don't like to hear that Nixon is who created the EPA.
Right, exactly. And Congress is very much in support of this, and we were just doing the most foundational work on the environment, and we were pissing off corporations. They were just furious at this. And then we start to soften. As soon as those doors are open, corporations, oil companies, coal companies, who knows what, automotive companies, are coming into these committees, and all the legislation is softening.
And this is, income inequality skyrocketing, the amount of lobbyists skyrocketing, the amount of money that lobbyists are putting in the system. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. The vast majority of Americans support Medicare for all, or some sort of federally funded healthcare system. The vast majority of Americans support net neutrality. The vast majority of Americans oppose cutting Social Security up to 90%. I mean, the list goes on with that. And these are obviously big examples, right? Yet we see our politicians doing the opposite of every single thing that the will of the people put forward. And there's actually a study that proves this, that shows that in every example of the people's will, it doesn't matter because it's not up to the people, James. Can you talk about what this study is and what it shows?
So you've got Martin Gillen's Benjamin Page come out in 2014. They get, it's an elaborate and beautiful study. They gathered tons of data. I think going back to the 50s, they haven't released their work on the older data. But the recent data shows that if the vast majority of Americans support a policy proposal, or if the vast majority of Americans dislike a policy proposal, that policy proposal has the exact same chance of passing. So what it says is if Americans really like it, or if they really hate it, it's still got about a 30% chance of passing. And the opposite is true if we look at elites or special interests. So if elites or special interests really hate a policy proposal, it's really unlikely that proposal is going to pass. And if they really like it, it gets up to about 60% that it's going to pass. So what it's basically saying is it's easier to kill legislation than it is to pass it, but it's also saying that elites have they find much more response to their policy suggestions or policy preferences than the vast majority of Americans. Interestingly, though, this is something that I looked at a while ago and presented in my research. I would say that Gillen's and Page's data probably doesn't change over time. So I don't suspect that this is something that changes in 1970. I suspect that we're going to see those numbers be pretty flat right through the 50s. And if we're talking about a policy proposal that Americans are knowledgeable of, those are actually the policy proposals that lobbyists don't do a lot of work on. It's as soon as and believe me, they're polling as well. So lobbyists are very aware when citizens don't know about a tax reform piece or something that's going to change taxation. As soon as it's not in the public sight, that's where you're going to see the most lobbyists on. And there's been congressmen who have said this. So the least amount of public attention, the more lobbyists you get. All right? And we're talking the American public's only going to know about 4 or 5 policy changes per year. And so when we're doing thousands upon thousands, the lobbyists are going to attack all of those. And we've had the tax reform in '86, and we just had the recent one in, was it 2017? In between those two, there's been over 20,000 changes to our tax code. None of that gets covered in the newspaper. None of that's going to make the big press. But the lobbyists are there on all of those. And the pressures that politicians feel are going to be on all of those, but only from the wealthy or the big groups that have a lot of power.
And it makes perfect sense why these numbers have remained static, because it's not saying how it changed with transparency or the weaponization of transparency. This is just saying this is the system that we have. We don't live in a democracy. We live in an oligarchy. Here's the data that proves this. So what the Transparency Initiative has done is just simply weaponize that system. I mean, it's made us think that we are free.
I think what it says more than anything is that Americans mostly don't know most of the policies. And even when they know something, I don't think they're very familiar with the ins and outs of it. So if you talk about the Dodd-Frank, go talk to people about the Dodd-Frank legislation on the street, and they're going to be like, oh yeah, they did something to the banks, right? I'm for it. And they're not going to know anything about the thousands of lines in there. The elites who are going to be affected by Dodd-Frank, of course, are going to know a lot more about it. And so we'd love to think that the American public is following legislation and they're understanding legislation. We just don't see that at all. We'd love to think that lobbyists aren't following legislation and they aren't the ones benefiting transparency, but that's precisely what we see.
With the initiation of transparency has made people more placated into thinking that they have more power over time.
Correct, absolutely. So with 200 floor votes a year, we don't find any citizens following the 200 floor votes. So already back in the 60s, they were talking about how little people followed votes. So even congressional scholars will tell you they don't follow 200 votes a year. They don't even follow 40 votes a year. Likely you don't follow 40 votes a year. I've never met anyone who follows 40 votes a year. They increased that number in 1970 to thousands of votes per year. You're talking millions and millions of pages just of hearings and legislation just to decipher one vote.
And let's talk about bills, because you made an obvious but very astute point. I mean, the Bill of Rights was how many pages?
Right. The Bill of Rights, the one that I have, fits on one page.
So, I mean, the bills today are stunningly enormous. I mean, thousands of pages, a lot of them are written directly by these lobbyists. And how does that fit into the special interest versus constituent? Like, let's say I want to be engaged politically.
Even back in the 70s, I would say it's impossible to follow legislation as a constituent. So you really have to trust your legislator. And your legislator can't follow all legislation. So what they're going to do is, if they're going to read something back in the 70s and they don't understand it, guess how they're going to vote? Hell no. Because I've got no pressures to vote on something stupid, right? I can't read it. It makes no sense to me. No one knocked on my door and talked to me about it. I'm not going to vote for it. Now, if I hand you something that's 1,000 pages back in 1970, you're just going to be like, give me a break. I didn't even have time to read it. How am I going to vote for this? But as soon as you can watch how people vote, and as soon as my pressure is, say, you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat, and I see all the Republicans voting for it, if I vote for it, I might get called out by my press anyways, right? Oh, he's siding with the Republicans. I don't even have to read it. I almost immediately, knee-jerk reaction, I have to vote against what you guys are voting. So we get this immediate partisanship. But I've also got pressures from the lobbyists to vote for it. And therefore, you could get legislation through that no one understands. And when I say no one but the particular special interest. So complexity rises, page length rises. The bigger the bill is, the easier it is to insert these lines that'll make everyone fall asleep.
Yeah, constituents are busy figuring out, how does this affect me? What does it disadvantage my community? These thousands of pages, the special interest says, boom, this is
right.
For or
Insert
against
this
me.
Obscure paragraph. So again, if the citizens can't understand it, boy, they stand a great chance. If people can understand it, well, it gets a little tougher.
The National Rifle Association, the lobbying arm of the gun manufacturing industry, is in the spotlight for its influence in Washington in the midst of an epidemic of mass shootings. The NRA's investments to defeat gun reform, which is favored by most Americans, reached $84 million in the 2016 election alone. Right-wing Florida Senator Marco Rubio was personally confronted by survivors of the Parkland school massacre about his gifts from the NRA.
So, Senator Rubio, can you tell me right now that you will not accept a single donation from the NRA in the future?
No, the answer to the question is that people buy into my agenda. And I do support the Second Amendment. And I also support the right of you and everyone here to be able to go to school and be safe. And that's why I support the things that I have stood for and fought for during my time there.
NRA money? More NRA money?
The influence of these groups comes not from money. The influence comes from the millions of people that agree with the agenda. Our goal here is to move forward.
Wait, so hold on.
And
so right now, in the name of 17 people, you cannot ask the NRA to keep their money out of your campaign?
I think in the name of 17 people, I can pledge to you that I will support any law that will prevent a killer like this.
No, but I'm talking NRA money.
No.
But how lobbyists influence politicians is not always as clear and direct. In Marco Rubio's case, he's only received about $5,000 in direct contributions from the NRA. But they spent over $1 million on his re-election campaign. They also used different forms of intimidation against pro-gun reform politicians. James D'Angelo further explains how these lobbying strategies work.
So surely it comes down to just electing the uncorruptible, right?
No. We don't find much evidence that they're corrupt. The way money's used, and this is all the dark money, most of the public money, and almost all of the campaign financing is used to intimidate. Almost all of the dark money is used for advertising. And almost all the advertising is negative advertising. And so if Abby, for example, starts voting against my initiatives, we're going to start taking out negative advertising against her. Now, if you don't change your views, that actually doesn't bother us that much. It terrifies everybody else who might be voting. But if we do that on a fairly consistent basis, and the NRA does that on a fairly consistent basis, everybody knows that if they vote against the NRA, they're going to find tons of ads in their district. And the ads aren't going to be about guns. They're going to be on whatever would take this person out. So when Joe Manchin stepped up against the NRA, when the approval rating for tougher gun laws in the US was over 90%, when he proposed some soft gun legislation, the NRA started taking out millions of dollars of ads against him. None of the ads were about guns.
I mean, I guess it's going out on a limb to say that these people are not corrupted, because let's say, just best case scenario, everyone's joining the legislative body wanting to do good. At a certain point, they know that to keep that position, they have to keep taking the money from their corporate donors because I mean, that's the sheer cost of running and maintaining your position in government. So I don't see how the bribery isn't a thing.
It's much easier for me to start funding this guy over here who's got a long history for voting for the tobacco companies, and fund him and then try and take you out with a ton of negative ads and go after you on every level possible. And it's much cheaper than bribery. Because if I pay you for a vote today, are you going to ask for more money tomorrow? Of course you will. But if I get someone who's always voted for some lunatic policy that I like, and I get them in office, I'm not going to have to pay them each time.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, just today we have the sheer amount of spending on campaigns has skyrocketed so much just over the last 10 years, where you have the Democratic Party actually making candidates do Rolodex tests, where you have to prove that you can raise 250 grand through the contacts on your phone in order to even be backed by the party institution.
Right.
So I guess what I'm saying is, it almost seems like self-sabotage, because all of the people in their Rolodexes are obviously going to be tied to the special interest, to the corporation. So it's almost like you're shooting yourself in the foot before you even get into office.
It could be. I mean, we certainly could expect some of that. Intimidation's baked in. But if you look at Lawrence Lessig or Zephyr Teachout, who are talking about corruption, in both of their books, full books on corruption, they don't mention intimidation. It's all bribery. Humans are great at intimidation. You vote with me on this, or we talk later. That's legal, right? And everybody knows what that means.